Vocabulary for this lesson is credible, which means real or reliable information, misinformation, which means wrong information, motive, which means someone's intention, the reason they say or do something, and expertise, which means a special skill or knowledge about a particular thing. Experts have expertise. Let's review. We've gone over how to find and use two databases. Remember, data means information, and base is a place where information is stored. We've explored the databases called PebbleGo, Next, and Britannica Learn. We've also talked about why a database is a better source for doing research rather than just using a Google search. Who remembers what problems might happen if only doing a Google search for information? If you said that Google can have a lot of wrong information or misinformation, you're right. For example, I don't know anything about making tamales, but I can pretend to know and post directions for making tamales on the internet. But if you follow my directions, you're going to have some very gross tamales. Another way to say this is Miss McD is not a credible source on making tamales. So that's pretty scary. Anyone can post things to the internet? You might be asking yourself, what's real and what's not? How will I know? Well, there's some tricks we can use to figure out what's real and what's wrong information. Another way to say real information is credible information. What makes something or someone credible or trustworthy? Every day, you make decisions about what to believe and what not to believe. Was that video you saw real or fake? Is your older brother telling you the truth or teasing? Is that rumor you heard about a friend true? What do you do when you're trying to decide if someone is telling the truth? Do you already use these following clues? What you know about a person. For example, you know if a classmate is really good at something or has a history of being truthful or playing practical jokes or being mean. So you can usually tell when they are serious or joking or lying. Clue 2. What a person knows about you. For example, your parents know what kinds of foods give you a stomach ache, so you follow your parents' advice about what to eat. The school librarian, me, knows your interests and what kinds of books you like, so you trust me with book recommendations. Clue 3. Tone of voice and facial expression. For example, you know that your friend means the opposite of the words they say if they roll their eyes and act snarky while they tell you they had a terrible time at the new skate park. Clue 4. The situation. For example, when friends are playing around and one teases you about your new haircut, you know it's just a joke. But if someone at school says the exact same words to embarrass you in front of the whole class, it's an insult. When we hear things from a media source like a video, a person on TV, or a website, we don't personally know the source and they don't know us. We may not be sure about whether to believe them. Even when someone we know sends us a text, there are no clues from facial expressions or tone of voice. So we might not be sure of what they mean. That's when we need to ask questions. Evaluating sources. If you wanted a recommendation for a great new video game, Would you ask your grandmother? Or to ask it another way, is your grandmother a credible source for information on video games? A credible source is one that we can trust to give us accurate and relevant information. Make a pros and cons list, like in this table, to explain the benefits and drawbacks of asking your grandmother or another grown up for video game advice. Pause the video to make a quick list, then click play when you're done. If your list looked similar to the one in the table, you've just used two of the most common tools we have to decide if a source is credible: motive and expertise. Expertise is a special skill or knowledge about a particular thing. Experts have expertise. Motive is someone's intention, the reason they say or do something. Which item in the list gives you information about Grandma's motives? Which items say something about her expertise? So, is the grandma on this pro con chart a credible source for information about which new video game to get? She wouldn't lie, but it would probably be better to ask someone who cares about us and who also knows something about gaming and the types of games we like. We may also know that Dad is a great cook, but is clueless about fashion. Our coach knows basketball, but not gymnastics. Or that Grandma can fix almost any toy, but doesn't know anything about video games. Just because a person is an expert on one thing doesn't make them an expert on everything. Your turn. Make your own pros and cons list. If this is the first time you have thought about how you use motive and expertise as clues to decide which information sources are credible, you might want to practice some more. Imagine that you want to know how to be a better soccer player. Make pro con lists for these four choices so you can decide if they're credible sources. Make a list for your grandma. Make a list for an article written by a winning high school basketball coach. Make a list for a website that sells soccer shoes and gives advice. And make a list for videos that teach soccer practice techniques. Imagine that you want to know how to be a better soccer player. Make pro con lists for these four choices so you can decide if they're credible sources. Make a list for your grandma. Make a list for an article written by a winning high school basketball coach. Make a list for a website that sells soccer shoes and gives advice. And make a list for videos that teach soccer practice techniques. You can find these tables and fill them in on the Google Doc, which is attached to this assignment. What do you notice about the strengths and weaknesses of each of the four sources? Is there one that knows how to teach, but may not be familiar with soccer skills? Is there one whose advice always seems to include buying something from them? Is there one that knows soccer, but doesn't know you or which skills you need to work on? On the Google Doc, answer this question: who would be a good source to go to, and why do you think so? Credibility is rarely an all or nothing call. Most sources have strengths and weaknesses. That's why the very best answers often come from asking many sources and comparing their answers. Next week, we'll practice these steps again with some different scenarios and check the credibility of sources. So, what makes someone or something credible or trustworthy? How will you know if they're credible or trustworthy?